Hi everyone and welcome back to designing a website in Figma. In today's video we are going to be continuing to work on our case studies page, and specifically this is the interactive design that we are going to be creating today. So let's get straight into it. Here we have what we have created so far in the previous two episodes, and today we are going to be taking a look at this section, or more like all the remaining area in this wireframe. When you hover over individual case studies, you actually get shown all these numbers and information about the specific company success story to make this interesting, more engaging. So this is kind of the logic outlined right here, and let's just get straight into it, okay? There's going to be a component that will have a default and a hover state, default, and then also a hover state. And we are going to be creating these two designs, and then we're going to connect them and make them interactive and put them on our page right here. And there are some resources that I would like to gather before I start designing this, and that's images. So I would like to get a couple of images. I think that we are going to be reusing what we used on our blog page. So let me just take this image, and then this image, for example, and I'm just going to copy that over here, right? So I'm pressing Alt or Option and then dragging this image all the way to this case studies section. Okay, so I'm going to be creating three different designs, or more like I'm going to create one placeholder, and then we're going to create variants with these images. And let's think about what this component should contain. So here's the logic that I have in mind. I think there should be definitely a headline, a name of this case study. I think it should say something like how Company A achieved great success with our app. All right, so that's going to be like the name, which contains the story, contains the company name, basically outlines what we are going to be talking about in this case study. And then what additionally could be presented here is like a small tagline that would be like industry, right? So consider that you would, for example, have a car manufacturer, using your app, for example. So you would put automotive as a small note, as a tagline right above the article name, above the case study name. And then maybe you want to get like a button that would be quite small, quite like no background version, right? So basically what we have on the blog article right here. So yeah, just to reiterate, we're going to be creating basically something like this, but for case studies. In fact, why don't we reuse this component, just the one initial state, because the hover state is going to be different. And yeah, this actually outlines pretty perfectly what I have in mind, right? So the category one would be like automotive, and then this would be how company A achieved great success, blah, blah, blah. And then this would be the button text, so read now. And also, as you can see, we are using the tag component, which I'm going to use here as well. So when I go to assets, I'm going to search for a tag. So tag that's right here, I'm going to drop it onto my page. By the way, if you'd like to know how we created this tag, this component, go and watch the episodes where we designed the blog page. Using this component, the tag component and the button component, and also this headline, I'm going to create an auto layout. But before I do that, I'm going to change the text style of this headline to H4. So H4 headline, how company A achieved great success with our app. Select both of these, Shift A, and then let's just go for something similar like right here, which is the spacing of 12, so 12, and padding of 24 on all sides except for the top one. So 24, 24, and then detail and change the top one to 20, right? And then I'm going to press enter, deselect this tag by pressing shift and clicking this tag, and then this button as well. And with this headline, I'm going to go for fill container on the horizontal resizing, which is how we get this, right? So as you can see, we are basically rebuilding this section right here, extremely similar. I'm going to add a fill to this section, so that's white, and also set the rounding to 12, and I'm going to also change the button text to read now. So here's the thing, although this is for the blog, right, this is the blog component, blog like individual article, and this is the case studies component, or soon to be case studies component. Even though they are different, we want to maintain design consistency, because both of these are basically articles, right? You get the same behavior, and it's something extremely similar because, as you can see, when you click on the case studies overview, you're going to go to an individual case study page. And because that behavior is so similar to what you get on the blog, then the appearance of this component should be similar or almost identical. How specifically is this going to be different is the hover state, essentially. So it's going to be almost the same, but slightly different. Maybe also the width is going to be different, but yeah, we will see. And also for the tag, what I'm going to do is select the tag, click this icon over here and go to the main component. And here I want to do one thing. I want to first of all change the category 1, 2, 3 to basically color. So the only difference of these is basically color. I'm going to add another variant of this. So I'm going to click this variant and I'm going to just type in 4, right? So we have color 1, 2, 3, and 4. And to this color number 4, that's going to be blue. It's not going to be the fill, but it's going to be rather the black headline. That's going to be blue, and also the drop shadow, that's also going to be blue. Let me sample that from here and then reduce the opacity to about right here. And because the whole case studies page is kind of uses this blue color, we want to reflect that in this design, and therefore I'm going to change the color of this instance of the tag to 4. So we get the blue version. Let me also change the shadow because this is extremely subtle and I want to make this a little bit more prominent. Let me enable the fill on this component container. So that would mean drop shadow, increase the opacity, but at the same time decrease the lightness. So HSL and decrease lightness. I think that's better. Return to instance. And yeah, this is just a bit more. I think it's better. So the next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to select this image, for example. I'm going to hide all of these fills. So that is just basically an image container, right? An empty rectangle, empty container basically. And similar to this, again, I'm going to set the height to 140 points. 140. And then what I'm going to do is select the frame 20, this empty image container, Shift A, press enter, fill container, and again, similar to this, the spacing is going to be -12. -12. I bet you didn't know you can do negative spacing, but you can. And also the overall rounding of this whole component is going to be 12. And then I'm going to change the size. You can see how it's responsive. I'm also going to enable this image, for example, for our purpose, clip content on the frame 21. And yeah, basically you can see here how we basically rebuilt this component from scratch. Okay, so that is a good approach when you want to maintain consistency. Elements with similar behavior or with identical behavior actually should look identical or similar. Okay, maybe we also want to reduce the opacity of this button to like 30% just to make this very, very subtle. And now let's actually start turning this into a component. So frame 21, I'm going to rename this to case study preview, and I'm going to turn this into a component by going over here and clicking this icon. I'm going to select the text, the headline directly, and under content, I'm going to create a new text property, and this one's going to be case study headline. And yeah, so the reason why we are doing this is when you use an instance of this component, you can then edit that right here. Perfect. So next thing I'm going to do is duplicate or create another variant. Let's do that again. So with this component selected, plus icon on the top, and rename this variant to hover. First one is going to be default, and this one's going to be hover. I'm going to press Shift Enter to select the component directly, auto layout from left to right, horizontally. The cool thing is now this headline as well is tied to the content component property. So when we change a state right here to hover, you can see it still says right here, even though we've defined the headline in the previous state. Now what I'm going to do is select this text directly, again, duplicate that over here and type in 00, just 00%, a specific number, okay? I'm gonna also go to advanced type settings over here and change the resizing to auto width. I will probably use H3. Let's try that. So the third most important headline, and also duplicate this and then change the style of this to tagline. So this is going to be a tagline. This tagline is going to say improvement in something, and let's go for even bigger, H2. No, let's just stay at H3 for now. I'm going to select both of these text objects, press Shift A, and then enter, and again fill container on the horizontal resizing to again have this responsive behavior. I'm also going to change the spacing to 0 probably, or something really small like 5, 4, something like that. And of course, then I'm gonna change the name to metric 1. I'm going to duplicate this twice so that I get metric 1, 2, and 3. Select both of these again, Shift A, enter, fill container, Shift enter, and now I get a fully responsive object like this, right? I'm also going to rename this whole thing to metrics. Then I'm going to also again go to assets and search for a button. This button, I'm going to paste that right here, and it's going to say read now as well. The read now, it's going to be no background as well. And I'm probably going to borrow an arrow from the hover state of the blog article preview. I'm going to borrow this arrow from right here. It also rhymes. Borrow this arrow. I'm going to put it right here. Then I'm going to select the arrow. So I duplicated, right? I duplicated the arrow from right here. Command C. So now that I have a button and the arrow right here, I'm going to select both of these, Shift A, and then set the spacing to auto so that we get this behavior, right? So the position of the arrow basically adjusts based on the total width of this container. I'm going to also rename this container to CTA plus arrow just to keep our naming intact. And yeah, now here's what I'm going to do. I am going to select the metrics auto layout, press enter, and then on each of these individual metrics, since I selected all of these, right, I'm gonna create a padding just on the bottom, right? So just on the bottom, I'm gonna create a padding of like 6. And I'm gonna add a stroke, so plus right here. But then I'm gonna go over here to strokes per side, and I'm going to go to bottom only. So I created a line only on the bottom of these metrics, right? So this is what I get right now. Now I'm gonna select the metrics auto layout and reduce the spacing to like this, approximately 6 maybe. But then I'm gonna again go and select individual metrics and increase the bottom padding to compensate for the loss of the padding on the parent, right? Also select container again and maybe just set that all the way to 0, and then set on the remaining two, on these two, set the top padding to like 6. We are basically compensating by lost spacing on the metrics parent auto layout by adding these paddings in the child elements, right? If that makes sense. I'm also just gonna keep adding the top padding rhymes again, which is probably gonna be like 12, while the bottom one is gonna be 16 here as well, right? I think that this is nice to look at. And now that I look at this, I think I could actually disable the stroke on the very last one. So remove stroke on the last one, right? We basically just get a divider on this, and then also remove the bottom padding on the last metric, right? So this is what we get. It's also responsive, by the way, because we used fill container on all of these child auto layouts. So I hope you're with me so far, because this is getting a little bit complicated. We are getting really technical right now, but in any way, it doesn't really matter the specific paddings that you have, as long as you achieve this result with the lines in between. That should be all right. When this is done, I'm gonna select the call to action plus arrow and the metrics and press Shift A to create another auto layout. Then I'm gonna press enter and again fill container. All of these are now in frame 21 with all of these being responsive. So as you can see, these metrics are responsive, and also this arrow plus the button is also responsive, so everything is completely responsive. And I'm going to add padding to this frame 21, and that's going to be 24 points, 24 and 24, right? So you can see how this is kind of similar to the structure that we have here. Here is also a 24-point padding. When it comes to the spacing, this thing right here, this is gonna be auto. Why are we doing this? When I now resize this whole element, you can see not only is this horizontally responsive like this, it is additionally keeps this section on the bottom, right? Let me enable the fill. So you basically get this behavior. So this is completely responsive. So any size this is going to be in, you get a responsive behavior. And now I'm going to select this frame, rename this to hover state info, and I'm going to set the background to blue. This is going to be blue, very prominent. And then also the black, that's going to be white. So under selection colors, I'm going to change the black to white. And one small change, I'm also going to change the image in both of these variants in the case study preview to fill container vertically as well. So this is going to force us to set the height and width on our own. Okay, so that's great. I'm going to do one thing. I'm going to select this hover state info. Then I'm going to press Command X, select this hover state and press Command V, right? So this happens, it looks all messed up, but don't worry, we're going to fix that. I'm going to set the position of this to absolute position right here. So this will kind of enable us to move with this freely around the parent element. And as you can see, all of these texts kind of got tied to the content component property. And I'm going to detach all of these. I'm going to open all these metrics on the left side. I'm going to select all of this, and then I'm going to detach this. Set the content to 0. Let's just try setting that to 0. Brilliant. You reset all of this basically. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to align this to the left. So Option A, then Option W to align this to the top. And then I'm going to resize this so that it fits precisely within this whole layout. Okay, so this is basically what we get. Then I'm going to also check clip content on the parent element, and here we go. It's also good to mention that this cannot stay at fixed. So the hover state info has to be set to under constraints to left and right, and then top and bottom. Okay, so now if we use an instance of this component, and when I resize this, you can see how it behaves exactly how we want this to behave. This section is being resized as well. That's great. Let me adjust these two things. I'm going to select the first two metrics, and the stroke is going to be set to like 30 or 40, right? We want to make these lines very subtle. Then I'm going to select the first number, and I'm going to create a new component property, a new text property by selecting this and then going to content and create a new property. This one's going to be called result 1. This is going to be just 1. This right below is going to be called, again, content, create new property. This one is going to be called result 1 description. It'll be 01 description, not enter, but create property. And then I'm going to continue with this. So content, create property, result 02 and 02. One right below, create new property, result 02 description, 0 content, create property, result 3, and then right below content, create property, result 3 description, and 3 description. Also, I'm going to select these descriptions, and I'm going to probably go for all caps as specified in type settings, so uppercase. Let me copy the hover state info from the second state to the first state as well, right? And for some reason we cannot paste that in. Let's just try selecting the hover state info, alt and dragging into this variant. Let's try that. Okay, that seems to work. Centering that right here. Constraints are going to be left and right, top and bottom, but it's going to be set, you know, the opacity of this is going to be set to 0. So 0. Why am I doing this? I'm doing this because when I don't paste this hover state info into the first state as well, I don't get these properties right here, right? Watch as when I remove the hover state info and then select the instance, you can see these component properties disappear, and I don't want that, so I need to keep this at enabled, right? It has to be there, it has to be enabled, not hidden, and its opacity needs to be set to 0. So Figma thinks the object is there, and it is there, but we don't see it, so that's ideal. Okay, so now when we set the 02 number to 0002 and then change the state, it's going to be reflected in the second state, even though we are setting that in the first state. Okay, if that makes sense. And the thing I'm going to do now is select the first state, go to prototype and connect the first state to the second state. On click, change to property one hover, except it's gonna be while hovering. So while hovering, change to state property one hover, and let's just test what we built, right? So let me go to assets, search for case study preview, and then drop that right here. I can now resize this without any problems. I can also change the state. Right, and let's launch the prototype, and this is what we get. So when I now hover over this case study, it's going to change to basically the outline of what this company has achieved with our app. Right? So let me just put in some actual valid information, like 30% increase in efficiency, 2x creative output, and half the time needed. I can specify that right here, and then as you can see, if I hover over this, info is being shown right here. So we're going to have multiple of these. I'm also going to change the half to half with a capital H. This is great. And I'm also gonna change the shadow of this hover state to reflect the blue color. So drop shadow, sample the blue, increase the blur, increase the Y coordinates, and then reduce the opacity of the shadow to 20 or 16 and test results. Yep, I like this. It's very subtle, yet adds a little bit of depth. So that's awesome. And since this is on a white background, I'm probably going to use a slightly light gray. So let me just change that to light gray and see what this looks like. Yeah, that's nice. So even darker, a little bit, very light still. Or we could do a white fill and a very subtle outline. So let's try that. Okay, I think I like that. Let's try this actually. And then let me just duplicate this 5 times to get a grade of 6 stories. And remember, this has to adhere to our layout grid that we have set up. So each of these is probably going to be like 4 columns, right? We're gonna go for 3 by 2, so that's 3 by 2. And then let's just duplicate these and add a similar space, 20. And 24 in total. I'm gonna disable these guides again by pressing Shift G. I'm gonna change these headlines and images. So company A achieved great success with our app. I'm gonna retype the category 1 to industry, all caps, industry 1. And then I'm gonna change the image by choosing one of these 3. I'm going to disable this, copy, select this image, paste that in. Then this is going to be industry 2, and that's going to have this image. So copy, so paste that image in as well, right? We're pasting that into our image placeholder. And then lastly, probably this one, copy, select this image, paste, and then I'm gonna probably just do this thing right here where I'm gonna shuffle these around and create a second row from the first row like this, right? So let's just maintain the spacing, and this is gonna be industry 3, industry 3. And then what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna search for a call to action, CTA section. I'm gonna drop that right here. Enable the guides, just make sure it adheres to our guidelines, and I'm going to position that right here and then move that closer to, basically move the footer closer to the call to action. And now this is what I get, right? When I come to the case studies page, for example, from the home page, so I'm on the home page, resources, case studies, this is what I see. We have created this in the previous episode, and then I get all these case studies, and when I hover over them, you can see how I can see these individual numbers, these individual results, and then I get the call to action section and the footer. How to use this actually? So let's consider the 5th case study, right? So we have some specifics right here. If I want to change those, I can simply go here. Let's say that I want to change the first number from 30 to 60%. So I'm going to just go over here to the case study preview component settings and set the result 1 to 60%. Then this will be updated accordingly, as you can see right here, right? So this is very simple to actually put in some data. And also what's really cool about this is it's fully responsive, right? So consider that, for example, let's just move this away temporarily, and this would take space of both of these case studies, right? If you check this out, you can see there was some bug, but it got fixed quickly. When I hover over this case study, it's responsive, and I get like all the same elements but simply bigger, right? Yes, this tutorial was a bit complicated, but it was worth it. As you can see, we made this scalable, literally scalable, and we ensured that, for example, when we are going to be creating the mobile version, this is going to be very simple, right? So this is responsive, easily adjustable using component properties, and you can change the headline, then the image, very easy. So leave a comment below if there was anything unclear. Thanks for tuning in for this video. I hope you have learned something new, and I will see you in the next episode of Designing a Website in Figma. Thanks for tuning in. See you in the next one.